This time it's the Piaggio XEVO 125. Now before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. It's fair to say that unlike in mainland Europe, scooters have never been popular over here. Except maybe in London, you see quite a lot there, but outside the capital, they're a fairly uncommon sight on Britain's roads. In some ways, this is slightly strange because after all, scooters offer great weather protection, and British weather is, well, let's just call it a little bit changeable. And the Piaggio XEVO that I'm riding today is a fairly good example of how useful a scooter can be on Britain's roads. Piaggio's XEVO range is based on an earlier X8 and even earlier X7 range. These feature a strange boot on the back, but is actually very useful, as I'll show later. The XEVO features a 125 4-stroke single overhead cam water-cooled engine making 11 kilowatts or about 15 horsepower. There's also a 250 and 400 versions available. I'd imagine these are actually quite useful. The 125 pulls reasonably well. I'd imagine the larger versions are great fun on the road. The XEVO series were introduced in 2014 and this model features what's called the lead engine. And these use carburetor fueling and, as you might expect, CVT gearing. The engine and gearing are well set up and it will pull up to around 70 without too much trouble, but there's a comfortable cruising speed of about 60. Under acceleration the thing rockets up to around 60, but that big barn door fairing makes finding the last few miles an hour a bit of a wait. Like most scooters, the engine swings up and down along with the suspension. This can make scooters feel quite lumpy over bumpy surfaces. This one's no great sinner. The suspension and ride feels pretty good, although it's not to the standards of a decent motorbike setup, but pretty good nonetheless. There's twin shocks on the back and twin hydraulic forks, as you might expect, on the front. Despite the 160 kilos of all-up weight, as you can see, the thing accelerates and overtakes pretty well. And this makes for a very laid-back riding experience. It's very easy, particularly when you compare it to a 125 conventional motorcycle, which you have to thrash through the gears to get any speed up. With this thing you just open the throttle and away you go. Add to it that comfortable seat and footboards which allow you to move your feet around, and this all adds up to a machine that will cover great distances in pretty good comfort, I have to say, although perhaps not on the motorway. Right, let's look for somewhere to pull over so we can look at some of the more practical features that scooters are best known for. Getting the bike on the stand's a doddle. It may be 160 kilos, but the weight is carried pretty low. Walking around you're struck by the bulk of the machine, but don't be fooled, it's mostly plastic. There is a steel trellis frame under there, but like everything else on the bike, it's hidden and well protected from the elements. Moving to the front of the bike, you can see those impressive looking headlamps. They've got a one-off, one-on function, and I have to say are not the best feature of the bike. They don't offer particularly good illumination at night. All in all, I'd say this is a fairly elegant bike. Okay, it's no 916, but then it isn't meant to be, is it? The switches on this bike are operated electrically. Hit the one on the right, and the boot right at the back of the bike pops open and allows you to gain access. This is a space large enough to carry a crash helmet, although in ours it's a little bit restricted because you've got a top box holder on. While this boot might seem a little bit novel, it's actually really practical because it gives you a full 80 centimeters of length for storage. Really handy if you're trying to put a tent away or something like that. The left hand button unlocks the seat. Lift this up and there's ample room for another full face crash helmet. and quite a bit more besides too. Push on the ignition barrel and up pops the cover for the petrol tank. This holds a fairly useful 12 litres, and this should be enough for a couple hundred miles I'd say, although we haven't tested it yet. There's also the usual handy hooks for putting shopping bags on. It's important to remember to put the steering lock on, as this locks all the latches too. Without a bulky fuel tank in the way, as you can see, there's plenty of steering lock, and this makes making U-turns pretty easy, although this is not one of my best. Point deducted for a dab there, biker dude. Braking is discs front and rear. These are fairly effective, although you'll need to give a fair squeeze on those bars to get the thing to stop sharply. And of course there's no ABS. The dashboard's fairly comprehensive. There's lots of idiot lights and a trip computer too, although I've never really understood why they bother fitting a rev counter to scooters. But it's still nice to watch the thing bop up and down. Of rather more use is a proper fuel gauge, and this is a handy addition to any motorcycle. I have to say this is a fairly bulky machine for a 125, so given it was quite roomy I thought let's see what it'd be like with a passenger on. So I got Deb to sit on the back. A handy way with scooters is to stand forward, let the passenger go over the rider's seat and then slide back onto the passenger seat. As you can see, the passenger's feet are impeded by the rider's legs, but actually this is not the case once we're underway. Back on the road I reflect on that comfortable seat. It says 790mm high, but it's very wide, so actually the reach to the floor can actually feel quite a bit more than that. The front wheel is a 14-incher, and this is not a bad size actually for a scooter, and this gives almost bike-like handling. It steers pretty well, but once you get over gravel, you get the distinct impression that this is not a machine designed for off-road work. The exhaust is fairly muted. Now people have different opinions about this, but I think for a scooter designed to work in town, this is probably not a bad thing. But of course the most prominent feature of these bikes is that expansive bodywork, and I have to say it is very effective. There's no wind buffeting, you stay pretty warm, and amazingly dry too, well in light showers at least. And whilst it may blunt the performance a little bit, in a headwind for example, it seems like a small price to pay. And crosswinds don't seem to bother the bike too much at all, at least no more than any other motorcycle I'd say. So are there any downsides you might say? Well of course there are one or two. For a start, that big bulky bodywork. It may keep you nice and dry, but it makes the thing really difficult to fit into a space in your garage. Also being a carburetted bike, it really does like to warm up a little bit in the mornings before you ride away, but aside from that, the thing runs pretty well, and carburation generally is perfect. And of course there's that other major downside, the fact that it's a scooter, so for many people it's just not cool. But if you can live with that, well, I'd say it was a pretty good all-round machine, and very, very practical too. Well, hope you enjoyed that video. There will be more scooter videos coming soon, most likely in a comparison test against a geared 125. Well, if you enjoyed that video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course stay safe, and thank you very much for watching.